All right, so I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who will talk to us about breaking developments in dental technologies. Here to answer our questions along the lines of breaking developments in dental technologies is Dr. Jeremy Krell, who is a general dentist and business expert, is the managing partner of Revere Partners, the first independent venture capital fund dedicated to oral health, and Rise Health, the only inclusion-driven venture capital fund dedicated to oral health. So thank you very much for joining us, Jeremy. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me, David. Really appreciate the opportunity.
So just as a side note, I recently read the book Bite. Not sure if you've seen this or heard of it, but it mentioned that Paul Revere was a dentist. And is that how you got the name of your fund?
Yeah, that's a great little factoid in dental. I went to Tufts Dental. It's a Boston-based dental school. This is one of the first things they taught us in sort of the introduction to the program, a little bit about the history of dentistry. And part of that was that Paul Revere, who's obviously known for his historical significance in, making his statement, "The British are coming," right? His midnight run, and also known for his silversmith work. In addition, was a dentist. Some of that silversmith work was, made as an application to people's mouths. So the other part of it is it's Boston based, which is where I went to dental school. Many of our early team had roots in Boston. And in addition, that midnight run that he did was actually done on my birthday, April 18th in the late 1700s. So all those things contributed to naming it Revere Partners.
Okay, great. So maybe let's take a minute and tell us about the scope of your fund and the range of investment opportunities that you seek.
Yeah, sure. So Revere Partners is really the first and only venture capital fund globally that focuses on dental technology. It's by dentist for dentist and has expanded to investors of all kinds. We invest, when I say dental technology, I really mean everything that's inside of the practice. So the software, the fintech, some of the biotech, like med tech in there as well. Sometimes a consumer product, but only where it goes through the dentist, specialty products and imaging. So basically the stuff that's inside of your practice. We don't invest in dental practices or back of the napkin ideas or public companies or large equipment and machinery or operationally heavy models like a distributor. We don't invest in those things. We truly invest in the technology inside of the practice. And then in terms of the scope of our funds, we're now on fund 3. We have a total of 3 funds that each are a little bit bigger than the one before. Our previous portfolio currently consists of 42 separate companies that have been invested in from our funds, which are in addition to our syndicate, which have a whole separate set of deals that sort of raise on their own, whether or not they get an investment from the fund.
Okay, and may I ask the assets under management and average check size?
Yeah, so they differ per fund. For our first 2 funds, there's about in the ballpark of 50 million in assets under management. And their check size is anywhere from, I would say, roughly on average 300K to 3 million. Whereas the second fund, which is the third fund, which is raising now, is a targeted $100 million fund where check sizes will be 2 to 3 million on average, up to 5 million.
Okay, and typically, are you the only or primary VC fund that invests, or do you do that with a network, a group of other VCs?
Yeah, no, quite the opposite. Revere heavily believes in having diversity within the round. Whether or not we lead the round, we certainly want to see other investors and investors of all different kinds within it that can provide different levels of strategic expertise, different sources of funding. We think that that's beneficial to the company. So we'll work with the company. We have a large institutional co-investor program. So We have about 8 dozen or so pretty close funds, from really large down to really focused, that we will bring into rounds, as well as all kinds of other angel groups, even sometimes the occasional highly strategic individual or corporate strategic that we'll bring into the round. We really like to see a round with multiple investors in it.
Okay, great. So which dental technologies are you excited about now? Tell us about some of the interesting things happening in dentistry.
Yeah, there's such diversity there, in terms of kind of where the problems are in dentistry, right? Just a couple of examples. One major area that remains problematic in dentistry is staffing at all levels, from the clinicians, dentist and hygienist, all the way down to the assistant, the staff. Everybody plays a critical role in the practice, and without having some of those roles, it's really difficult to operate a day efficiently. So for example, we're invested in cloud dentistry, we're invested in Toothio. They take different approaches and cover different regions and target different customers, but they're really after, a similar problem, which is staffing is really hard, finding the right match and retaining that talent, structuring payroll appropriately. These things are difficult to do and to manage. For these businesses, for individual practices, for DSOs, it's a challenge. So that's one area that continues to grow, and continues to become more reliable. Another major pain point, where we're seeing exciting solutions come up, is the revenue cycle management area. Uh, Again, being able to make sure that a patient is eligible with their insurance, getting their rate sheets, understanding where they're at in their accumulator, going all the way down to the level of detail of what limitations are on the policy, doing that with different carriers and different policies across the country. This is a real challenge. It costs people a lot of time and effort to do if it's being solved through headcount in your practice. So we've invested in companies like AirPay and Zoob that are addressing this area. And then there's even, although it's less common in our portfolio, we do have some biotech and medtech in there. And a particularly exciting example of that is the company Perceptive. They've developed a unique imaging modality that powers its robotic, and complements its robotic capabilities. So you might have seen in major news media that they have done the first inhuman, AI-driven, fully autonomous dental procedure. Their robot can essentially prep a crown on a human tooth in less than 10 minutes, and do so at an exceptionally high level of accuracy. And so, that I think is a the robotics piece is a bit ahead of its time, but really providing an essential tool that can very much help and empower the provider, to be efficient at treating their patients in the practice, and be efficient over chair time and kind of operational throughput, as well as a really interesting imaging modality that can scan teeth very quickly and without ionizing radiation, instead using structured light, be able to see through the enamel, see through the dentin, see through saliva or blood or the gingiva, and very clearly see a finish line of a crown. It's a game changer in terms of the imaging modality as well. So these are just a few examples of new and exciting technologies that are solving real problems or pain points, or taking advantage of technological or scientific advancements today.
Okay, so is the lack of talent more profound for the dentist, the dental assistants, or the office staff?
It really varies. This is definitely a pretty broad problem. If I had to pick one that I'm seeing in the market right now, I would say that the hygienist is the most challenging role to find the right fit, to retain them, for both parties to be happy in terms of the employment terms. I think I would have to choose the hygienist. I also personally believe that this is a role that we are and we should be empowering more and more, that it can really not only be very accretive to the healthy financial performance of a practice, to have significant hygiene going on at a services level, but I think they also play a very important role in terms of diagnostics. I think they play an important role in terms of patient education. I think in general it's a critical component of the practice, and finding that right fit and retaining them is pivotal.
Okay, great. Yeah, I like the example you gave. I think was perceptive that facilitates imaging or molding the crown. Um, is that done because imaging is better, or what is enabling the development of a crown in only 10 minutes?
Yeah, and not to speak for the company, but I think they accidentally developed the imaging modality out of pretty much a lack of what was available. Right, you have a couple of options. You can do things that have ionizing radiation, which means two-dimensional or three-dimensional X-ray, right, type imaging, or you can do things that have no ionizing, a scan, right, using many of the intraoral scanners that are available on the market today, or take pictures, effectively of the teeth in the mouth, but neither feed the robot entirely with what it needs, right? The robot
Yeah.
ideally needs to have a plan, right, to drill the tooth effectively. So ideally, it could see inside of the tooth. It could know exactly, where and how deep to drill. It could plan to eliminate caries, dental decay in the tooth in the process of drilling the crown. So in order to do that, you sort of need to marry, the output of what you get from, two-dimensional or three-dimensional X-rays, being able to see in the tooth, along with, marrying it together with the scan, effectively the surface mapping of the tooth. And so their imaging modality, conveniently does both and feeds the software, with the image it needs to see, so that it can then create the plan, which can then be sent along. Again, just to clarify though, the robot is preparing the tooth. It is drilling the tooth. It is not making the crown. The crown is something you make separately. You can send it off to your own 3D printing process, or you can send it off to your lab to make the crown.
So are dentists really using 3D or labs that make the crowns? Are they using 3D today, or is that something that may happen in the future?
Yeah, 3D imaging and 3D printing are both available today. There are definitely dentists that have cone beam or CBCT. Also, there are many labs that and also dental practices that have 3D printers. They're just less penetrated in the market, right? The amount of dentists that have a CBCT, it's typically confined to specialists like oral surgeons or periodontists who are placing implants, or specialists like endodontists who are trying to navigate complex root forms. They might be more likely to carry or use a CBCT in their actual practice, so that they can do some of these advanced procedures. It's a lot less common to see, say, for example, a general dentist have a CBCT in their practice. So they're there, they're just less common. And so having something like this, fills the niche. It's not as expensive. You're not providing nearly as much radiation. There's no radiation, and so it's a better solution effectively for multiple reasons.
Is anything going on with stem cells?
There is stem cell work in dentistry. Again, it's another sort of technology area that is, both under research but also ahead of its time. So there are certainly a lot of translational research focused on growing teeth, and that's the biggest area. Could we replace a tooth by growing another one? So that is an area of exploration. I have not seen anything anywhere near market, even though there are some in development that are trying that. What we're seeing in market now are some other sort of related areas. I would say, for example, there's a company called Identical that is producing an implant that takes the exact shape of the original root form of the tooth. So you extract the tooth, you scan it, you make an implant that looks like what the original root looked like. So you could put it in the in a vacant socket without any drilling. So you have that, which gets us a little closer. You have various forms of regenerative bone materials, for example, that help with implant stabilization. So we have one called RevBio, which has a product called Tetranite, which provides some of that stabilization, is one example. And there's quite a few other examples out there that use everything from autogenous, samples to produce a bone regenerative material, or others. that are out there. So there's definitely the bone regen category that is sort of near to this. And then there's even some that are ablation, which is almost sounds like the opposite of stem cell, right? You'd use to grow new tissue. Ablation, you'd be trying to stop tissue from growing. But for example, there's technology out there that can target those pesky third molars, wisdom teeth that we have that often cause crowding, and can with sort of a laser fairly quickly and relatively non-invasively stop the growth of a wisdom tooth, the development of a third molar, and therefore stop the need to have it removed, or the risk of having an infection there, or whatever the other issues, crowding that come of third molars. So you even see some procedures that are opposite, if you will.
Yeah. It seems like some of the technologies may reduce the fear factor of going to a dentist and having some procedures. It seems like the identical product, it just seems like it's less painful the way they do the root canals or the image boots. So, as a broader question, do you see some of the new technologies reducing the fear factor of going to a dentist? Are they marketed as such?
Yeah, it's certainly well known and well studied that a major objection by patients is fear of going to the dentist, right? Fear of several things. Fear of pain is one area. Fear of the cost is another. Fear of shame is a third. There's many elements of fear and anxiety that have historically come and have been reported by patients in this area. That definitely exists. So there's technologies coming up in that area. We've seen a lot of AR and VR targeted at the patient. They're sort of providing a distraction therapy, if you will. Sometimes they're even providing pre or post-operative instructions while the procedure is going on in your mouth. So you see your doctor in 3D form delivering to you the instructions while the procedure is happening. So you see some of that, and there's again there's that distraction there that handles pain. There's a variety of other elements that handle pain too. We see there's technologies out there with local anesthetics that are buffered differently in order to provide, for example, a longer lasting effect, or be more effective even in the presence of an infection, which makes it a little harder to get the patient numb. So you see it at that level. You see technologies out there that help the patient get numb easier or less painfully, right? They fear that big needle going into their mouth to give them the injection. So there are some procedures out there that provide a more profound topical anesthetic, right? So it's kind of numbing the surface level so that when the needle goes in, you don't feel it as much. They're sharper needles so that they're causing less tissue damage, meaning you feel it less. So there definitely is technology innovation around the physical pain of the procedure as well to help reduce some of these barriers. So those things certainly exist.
So there's a lot of new technology in dentistry. What is the dental practitioner's appetite for absorbing some of this new technology? It seems like they're pretty busy. Their practices are generally thriving and profitable. How ready are dentists to embrace all these new technologies? It's learning curve, it's more money, it's maybe disruptive to the flow of patients, or is it a generational thing that younger doctors embrace the technology more readily than the older dentists?
Yeah, there's certainly some trends. A great question. There's certainly some trends and some rules of thumb here. One major rule of thumb of innovating in dentistry is that you certainly have to fit within the workflow of the practice. If you're going to disrupt, if your innovation or invention disrupts the flow of practice, and I'm not saying the flow of practice is perfect. In some areas, it can certainly be optimized, but if your innovation or invention disrupts it, you're in for a much steeper uphill battle, right? Versus fitting within the workflow, improving upon the existing workflow. That's a big difference, in terms of innovation. You definitely see some of this sort of age bias, if you will. Providers who have much more experience, decades, let's say, of experience, and have already tried a lot of different types of products and procedures and techniques and materials and so on. They've had a lot of continuing education. It's a little harder to change the mindset there, and you could, I think, reasonably understand why. So that's, it's not to say that's everybody, in that category, but it certainly is some of them. So I think that's definitely a piece of it. There's also a piece of, look, as physicians, as medical professionals, there's a level of risk here, and that sometimes puts a higher threshold on the burden of evidence-based medicine, right? What kind of research is done, show me the results in patients at statistically significant volume, show me the longitudinal data, right? You'll have dentists come back and say, kind of show me the proof, and put a pretty high burden for a startup on the proof. Obviously, for the startup, it can be quite difficult. Those things take time. They're expensive. The company can't just, can't necessarily exist without its early adopters. So you see this topic, this tension sort of come up a little bit in this space. And, look, I'll maybe close this comment by adding that some of the biggest innovations we have in dentistry have also received some of the highest resistance. So if you look, we're generally resistant to change in this profession, and that is something we need to change as a profession. But if you look at, aligners, implants, laser dentistry, even the use of CBCT, some of the other major innovations in this space have received huge resistance when they were first introduced. So it's no surprise that AI in dentistry and robotics in dentistry, these sort of, more modern innovations, have also similarly received, right, their resistance. So I think it's about making sure the value chain pays off. Does the provider get something valuable out of it? Does the patient get something out of it? I think that's really the key to success here.
Mm-hmm. It seems like the sales cycle would be pretty long. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's one question. Another question is, talked about the shortage of staff. When a dental practice brings in a new technology, does that excite the hygienists and the assistants, that they think they're working with cutting edge technology, and does that help retain the assistants, or is it more look like a nuisance? I'm already busy. It's just one more thing I have to learn, and I'm not making any more money.
Yeah, so sales cycle can really vary depending on both the type of technology that you're talking about as well as the target, right? It's a really big difference to, in terms of how you sell software, how you sell fintech, how you sell biotech. It's also a really big difference to sell to an individual private practice versus selling to a dental support organization, DSO. Those are all very different sales approaches and processes. Where the technology meets a burning pain point or need for the practice, finds that practice that is feeling that pain, it gets them at the right time, where they can consider adopting something like that, because they have time, because they have, the monetary resources, or just the bandwidth in general. These things have a lot of impact on the actual adoption curve and the sales cycle itself. So it really kind of depends on how that is targeted. Also, the scope of the technology, right? There's some technology that really is just used by one user in the practice, and it's actually relatively easy, to implement. And there's others that require actually a lot of, small changes or even big changes to different processes, that are there, or connection to different systems that are pre-existing or have a steeper learning curve on how to use. These things tend to have longer sales cycles. So again, the more it fits within the flow, the more the user sees the benefit, the more it finds them at the right time, the shorter that sales cycle is going to be. So that's kind of, to your first question. The second question again was,
when a dental practice acquires a new technology, does that excite and help retain the staff, or is it just a nuisance that they have to deal with?
Yeah, so it's really the essence of change management here that I think you're getting at, because dental offices are, people run businesses. And there's pretty big variation in terms of how the culture of innovation within a practice. Is that something that the practice has developed with its people? or not, and the individual people that you have there and their attitude towards technology. These things are huge impacts. But in general, if there's a pain point and if it's handled correctly, by the business owner, then I think the adoption, can be there. And in the case of hygienists and assistants, they have to really feel like they're being empowered, like they're getting a benefit out of it, right? Even if the benefit is for the overall practice, that it still does impact them individually, right? If it's just something where they're an input and they're having to use it and they're having to do more or do something differently, and it sort of becomes a nuisance or a burden to them in their workflow, and it doesn't directly benefit them, these are the more challenging situations because they're not feeling the satisfaction or gratification of using it, right? There isn't something positive there that necessarily comes out of it for them. So I think it's really important that if you have an end user in a hygienist or an end user in in an assistant, that there also be benefit for them there too.
And how important is financing for offering financing for dental device manufacturers? Do dentists expect to receive some financing alternatives, options?
Yeah, so I think, and just to be clear, your question is not about funding the startup. Your question
Correct.
is about providing financing to the practice to buy the technology.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, so generally speaking, unless we're talking about some really advanced, equipment, and generally it's a medical device, that fits this category. Generally, these things are affordable within the balance sheet, within the P&L of the practice,
Okay.
right? Whether they're subscription or they're upfront or there's some sort of hybrid model. These are generally things that stay within the four-figure, the hundreds, the four-figure, the five figures, right? They're typically pretty affordable for a practice. Once you get up to the, I'd say especially the upper five figures, or certainly anything in the six figures. Now we're in a rare range of things here. Then it would be, typical to get some additional financing for this. Some of the big banks do it, like the Bank of America's or Wells Fargo's, as well as many other financing shops do it as well. There are also some pretty significant tax benefits that a dentist can get for using technology in the practice, and I encourage them to look into that.
Okay, that's interesting. Can a dental device manufacturer, can they be successful just by growing, or do they pretty much have to sell their businesses to a larger dental company like Dentistry or something like that?
Yeah, they certainly can be successful for a long time. I mean, where we Revere Partners look to invest, we're looking for some pretty, steep and consistent growth in them. They're typically doing that, with a pathway to profitability. If they're not already profitable, they're doing that they're able to achieve that kind of growth by fundraising so that they have the money to invest in the ingredients that they need for growth. But they're usually, and it can go on for quite some time. It can go on 5 years, 7 years, 10 years independently. There are certainly some that can get big enough or exist, on their own for a long while. But and it depends on the unit economics of the business. But in general, the vast majority of technologies, especially that we look at or that we invest in, we believe they are likely to be acquired. And most commonly, they're acquired by a larger corporate strategic, or they're acquired by a private equity firm. In the case of the corporate strategic, they are largely thinking about how compatible is this with my existing product stack? Can this benefit something we have, or the user journey that we're trying to experience, that we're trying to provide? And in the case of a private equity firm, they're thinking about, how does this mature product fit, within our portfolio? Maybe it's just growing the product. Maybe it's using the product to serve other portfolio companies that they have. It's a slightly different mindset, but especially the companies that we look at from a venture investing perspective, they are looking to exit in some amount of time, and to let that bigger acquirer grow them, bring in more senior and experienced levels of management that are experienced in growing those stage companies, provide the funding to be able to grow, provide the compatibility within their product stacks or existing customer bases to use it. Basically see it flourish in a bigger environment.
Do you see most of your successful companies building up their own internal sales forces or using distributors to reach the
Yeah,
market?
really good question. I always caution a company. I mean, the short answer is hybrid, right? Is what I generally recommend. And each company is a little bit different, but I certainly caution a company from building out its own sales force, right? If you have every level, SDRs, different levels of account executive, you're building outbound, people who are calling, you're building out a field sales force, people who are knocking door to door. These things can get really expensive and really difficult to manage, right? So I would not necessarily recommend that for companies trying to grow in today's environment. While you may have, a couple of, strategic sales marketing hires, somebody, part of the core team or senior team that is overseeing the sales and marketing strategy. Maybe you have somebody, doing strategic sales, handling, kind of the corporates or the DSOs, maybe an account executive or two, somebody who can help show up to the dental events and handle the people you do happen to meet in person in your line of business. You're talking about I generally recommend a pretty small team there, something from 1 to 3, 1 to 5 people, right? And to be doing that only after funding, right? And only once you've shown the model that they are using works, and to really cap it. Other than that, we not only strongly recommend, we actually strategic sales opportunities, channel sales, right? We do want to see them partner with a manufacturer, partner with a distributor, partner with somebody else who has an existing sales force and has the synergy with your, product or service to be able to sell it more efficiently.
Okay. To me, it seems like it'd be particularly difficult to sell a dental product, a dental device. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that dentistry is regulated on a state-by-state basis. And is that right so far?
It depends on the regulation. There are some regulations that are federal, and there are some that are state by state. Certainly, there are quite a few known differences on a state by state basis.
So if I was selling a medical device, I would have to understand the different laws in different states and maybe who I can market the product to, whether it's a dental hygienist or periodontist or dental assistant. Is that right, or is it?
These things are, in my experience, that's not really too large a hurdle. These things are there's largely kind of playbooks for this. And in general, with a medical device or a biotech, actually who you can sell it to or market to isn't really much of a question, because at the end of the day, it's the practice has to buy it, and the practice owner has to be a dentist. So them anyway. So that isn't as much an issue. More nuanced areas of question come in, like, for example, who can use it, how and when, right? Do they have to have a general dentist in the practice, or just a general dentist on site? Like, is the general dentist or dentist the user, or can it just be supervised use? And what does supervision mean? Right. That, for example, that is an area that may differ from state to state, not as much necessarily who you can sell it or market it to.
Mm-hmm. So, in my reading, there seems to be a connection between dental diseases and other diseases, throughout the body. So, do you envision some of your companies that collect a lot of data being able to sell some of that data to a big pharma company that's doing research and wants to know, what the correlation is between various dental diseases and other diseases?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Certainly you're right. Oral systemic health is a huge area of focus and innovation today. It also is an area of focus for Revere and an area of interest. We've invested in several companies in what we call the microbiome sphere. For example, we've invested in a company called Viome, one in Lura Health, which is an ongoing monitoring. We've invested in one called Bristle Health, which is doing salivary testing, whereas Viome does gut, salivary testing, and oral cancer testing. So quite a few, and there's as well as different therapeutics that treat certain bacteria strains like P. gingivalis, which is a primary suspect in terms of its gingipains or its toxic byproducts that then go on to affect the brain in disease states like Alzheimer's. So yeah, this is an area of a lot of focus. without question, without a doubt, the diagnostics all the way through the different types of treatment. In terms of the usage of the data, right now the data focus is more on identifying there's a lot of bacteria in the mouth, lots of different types and strains, and lots of byproducts that they produce, which can then precipitate a lot of bad oral and systemic disease processes. So the data focus right now is on rightfully identifying who is the bad actor and what to do with them. There are academic centers that have pretty deep databases in this area already. The one that is the furthest, matured that I've seen is the Forsyth Institute. Some of these companies are big enough where they also have a lot of data. For example, Viome has a lot of data now already. In terms of selling it, sort of aggregating it, anonymizing it, and selling it to big pharma, I suppose it's possible. But my guess is big pharma would just acquire one of these companies. Rather than license data or something like that, they'd probably just scoop one of these companies and be able to gain it, both historically and an ongoing basis more directly.
Okay. And maybe the last question is, how attractive are foreign markets? Obviously there's a lot of people outside the United States, and there's wealthy countries. To me, as a layman, it doesn't seem like there's as much emphasis on dentistry, even in wealthy countries. Is that true, or how real are foreign markets?
Yeah, so some of them are very real, and for different reasons. Revere does about 70% of its investments, places 70% of its investments in companies that are based here in the US and about 30% abroad. Same thing roughly with our investor base. Based on kind of where they're from. There are certainly some very big international dental markets, some that are less mature and more mature. For example, Brazil, I would argue, is a bigger dental market than the United States with at least as much maturity. So that's an example. Another would be, Germany, or the Swiss German market. Is pretty big, historically has a lot of dental manufacturing and science and innovation, and a lot of adoption. So certain areas of Europe, definitely have mature markets. Another mature market is Australia, New Zealand, is a pretty well-known, pretty big dental market. Patients there care about their oral health and they prioritize it, right? And there's significant amount of spending and structure to the system. Both the care delivery system as well as the product system that support it. So those are some examples of big international markets from a sort of dental maturity, advancement in science and technology perspective. Then there's markets that are I would call developing at all different sizes and stages. For example, the United Kingdom is a decently sized market where culturally oral care has become more prevalent. Right. So they're growing. And then there's other, especially in Asia, there are large markets. We're talking about a country like India or China. These are very large markets just based on the number of people. Oral health innovation is something that is developing there. It certainly is not as advanced, and it is certainly not received as high a sort of cultural priority as other things, but these are large, advancing, kind of markets over the next 10 years. So it really kind of depends on the market, and it is something we watch closely.
And final follow-up: are you attracted to the markets you mentioned, like Brazil and Australia and so forth, because dental health is covered by the government, or because employers are more likely to cover dental treatment? What's sort of the driver besides just the people?
Yeah, we do, obviously, any kind of innovation in healthcare, you're always kind of thinking about the patient, provider, payer triangle, right? Or at least that's how we think about it here in the States. And that payer, sort of soundbite is a loud one because it's largely a private, either you're paying out of pocket or you have a private insurance. The amount of, Medicare, Medicaid, Medicare Advantage coverage is minority compared to those other, types of payment or reimbursement here in the United States. It varies globally, by a lot. It just changes the innovations a little bit. For example, here we might consider, an AI diagnostic that is, reading X-rays that might have, a revenue stream targeting payers directly. That might be something, valuable here to us in the U.S., but it might look different in another country if they're not serving private payers. or if instead maybe they have a government, contract, and that looks different for them as well, for better or for worse. It just changes the dynamics up a little bit, but it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily largely change the equation unless the patient has access, and the patient has actual, larger amounts of reimbursement. The bigger challenge here in the US is, dental insurance policies range from $1,500 to $2,500 of coverage, which hardly covers any type of major dentistry, right? That's exams, cleanings, x-rays, maybe a filling or two, right? But by the time you get into a crown or a root canal, an extraction or an implant, any of these forms of major dentistry, you don't have full coverage. At the best case scenario, you have partial coverage, and then these are expensive procedures. So, and then you see patients, not go through with the procedure because of the barrier that cost provides. So if that scenario is removed, by the government stepping in, for example, and covering more of the care, it changes the dynamics. Now the access issue is less, assuming they have a sufficient number of providers for the population, and the cost barrier is less, assuming they have real coverage. But on the other hand, the providers actually selling into the provider might be more difficult because they're closer to the government. And you also may have either zero or a completely different sale to the insurer because they're not private, they're public. So it changes the dynamics in the market, kind of who you can sell to, and where you can expect those revenue streams to come from, more than anything else.
Well, great. Well, this was a very informative session. So I'd like to thank Dr. Jeremy Krell from Revere Partners for answering all of our questions. We really appreciate your time and your insight.
David, thank you so much for the opportunity. Again, great to be here and speak, and appreciate your thoughtful questions as well.
Great. Okay, so that was an excellent session. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we will resume with Novodontics will speak to us in just a few minutes.